Hello, public opinion aficionados, and welcome to Rasmussen Reports. We're your one-stop shop for the 2024 election, especially if you want to hear it straight from the pollster's mouth. Now, subscribe if you haven't already on YouTube or Rumble, because we're going to start doing matchups weekly pretty soon. And next week, we're going into the field with a mega swing state poll that's going to have some really spicy topics in it. But today's topic is the 2024 election, and we have our latest matchup numbers. We're going to be taking a really close look at before and after Trump's New York guilty verdict. How has it affected the race? I think you're going to find it pretty interesting. And most importantly, we're going to touch on where does it leave the Democrats, which is not in a good place. And make sure you hold on to the end for a very special treat. A lot of people seem to now be talking about California Governor Gavin Newsom as the most likely replacement for Biden. And we're going to see how he does. But first, let's look at presidential approval. And here are numbers from before the verdict, right after the verdict, and just today. And if you can see, looking back in the middle of May, Joe Biden's job approval rating was pretty dismal, 40%, which is about as low as it's been in the last year. 59% of U.S. likely voters disapproved of Biden, so he was underwater 19 points. But what's really interesting to see is the Democrat and the independent numbers. Democrats had a combined total of 69% job approval for Biden, independents 34%. And if you look down the Democrat column to right track and wrong direction, Democrats were split 46 to 46. Fast forward to the week after the guilty verdict, and Joe Biden's job approval got up to 44%. And this is a round down. And I think one of the days it actually hit 45% with 55% disapprove. So from underwater 19 to underwater 10. But let's look at the party results. The Republican voters went down 1 point, but Democrats were up 8 points to 77%. And one of the days that week, they actually hit 78%. Independents got up 4 points to 38%. I'm pretty sure they broke 40 the following week. But look at Democrat right track. It's up to 52 points now from 46 just a few weeks before. Wrong direction was 41%, so down 5 points. So Democrats were really happy with the results of the guilty verdict. But, you know, it's been a few weeks now, and Trump's been out there raising a ton of money, and Joe Biden is once again stumbling in a pretty horrifying manner on the world stage. And where does that leave him? His job approval now, as of today, literally this morning, these are today's numbers, his total approval is at 43%. It actually is a 42 handle and being rounded up. His disapprove is 57%. So he's back to underwater 14 points. So I would say he's probably about halfway through a round trip. So his Democrat approval is still 75%, down a little bit from, again, the high of 78%. And the right track, wrong direction numbers are still quite a bit better than they were in mid-May. But to look at independents, and again, I didn't capture it with the June 3rd numbers, but their high point was 42%. And they're almost all the way back to where they started, 36% now, probably going down to a 33 or a 34 here in the next week or two. But here's what you're all here for, the latest 2024 election matchups. And we kind of predicted this. And again, to keep tabs on where it's been, Donald Trump has done better than +5 every time we've polled since December. The range has pretty much been about 6 to 10 points, although there was that one multi-way matchup where we had him up 12. But what was interesting is he went from 10 and 12 points up before the verdict to just 5 points in our latest matchup conducted, just after the results came out. But here we are again with Donald Trump back up to +9, beating Joe Biden 49% to 40%, almost 20 points better than Donald Trump was doing 4 years ago, and what I would call an insurmountable lead. And I've said this a few times, these numbers will tighten up as low propensity voters start to pay attention to the race, as a different mix of people start getting involved in polling. And of course, as Democrats carpet bomb all of America with billions of dollars of ad spending and also paid in kind election contributions from the likes of people like Google. But here are the crosstabs, and sorry if you need to pause this and zoom in, but Donald Trump is winning women by 5 points, but men by an astounding 13 points. He's doing really great among 18 to 39-year-olds, which is not the kind of signal that Democrats want to see. Here he's up by 6 points. He's leading middle-aged voters by 9 points and 65 and older by 12. That is better than he has been doing with them. The black vote, he's underwater, but almost only by 30 points. That's doing pretty good. If Donald Trump can get 27% of black voters, again, this is one of the lower results we see, and this has been up to 35%. But again, if Donald Trump can get 27% of black voters, the Democrats, I don't see how they win it. But then the crossover advantage is huge here. Donald Trump's getting an 86% of Republican vote, whereas Biden is only getting 73% of the Democrat vote, and Trump leads by 15 points among political independents. Now, this poll was done as part of our sponsored by Numbers USA monthly immigration index run, and we have a different set of demographics going along with this poll, so we don't normally get to see this, but I added religion and also where people live, major cities, suburbs, rural. And as you can see, I thought this was really fascinating. Donald Trump is crushing it by over 40 points amongst evangelical Christians. But if you're a mainline Protestant voter, you actually prefer Biden by 6 points. If you know anything about what's going on with mainline denominations and the schisms, I think these numbers are really interesting to see. Donald Trump is doing extremely well amongst Catholics. Biden's winning among every other type of person. That's atheist, Jewish, Muslim. And this I put up because, as Charlie Kirk astutely pointed out, in the latest Fox News polling that has Donald Trump down 3, they had the race really tight amongst rural voters. And I'm here to tell you that there is no way that's the case. We have Donald Trump winning by 21% amongst voters who say they live in a small city, town, or rural area of the country. And Biden is winning by a solid margin among those who live in urban and suburban settings. Trump is up 10 in the multi-way matchup, and Kennedy gets 9%, which is about where he's at. So, to be honest, in previous cycles, these numbers have swung around quite a bit, but these have been pretty predictable. Trump up massively, Kennedy getting the same, 8 to 10% that he's been getting every time. And Kennedy is actually helping Trump quite a bit among 18 to 39-year-olds. He takes 14% of the vote, and Biden is down to a paltry 32%. That is absolutely horrible. And he's helping Trump among independent voters as well, with Biden only pulling down 28% of the independent vote. Again, like 1/3 of the electorate is independent voters. Biden has to win them. Now, since I had the Numbers USA crosstabs up, I thought that we would take a look at just some of the kinds of interesting questions that we ask every month. We track this in an index that shows what Americans think in general about our stance on immigration. And ever since Joe Biden took office, believe it or not, voters have become much more hardline against immigration of any form, legal and illegal. But on the question of illegal immigration, is the government doing too much or too little to reduce illegal border crossings and visitor overstays? And, voters pretty much know what's going on. Only 12% of the country says too much, but 59% say too little. And we can also look at the party results here. Republicans, it's 12% too much, 76% too little. But even Democrats, mostly say the government needs to do more on the border. 38% say it's doing too little. Only 10%, even less than Republicans, say too much. And independent voters are right there with Republicans, 14% too much to 64% too little. But if you look at even Hispanic voters, 25% too much, 54% too little. I bet you think that's a surprising result. But in trying to control illegal immigration, should the government mandate that all employers use a federal electronic E-Verify system to ensure that they hire only legal workers for U.S. jobs? And this, to me, is a pretty good example of a simple policy that can be used to control illegal immigration. And voters by an astounding 69% to 18% margin say, yes, do it. Please go ahead. Republicans are clamoring for it, 80% to 10%, but even Democrats, it's 59% to 26%. And that's the rub with public opinion, is that Democrats do, in many kitchen table issues, espouse relatively conservative views about what needs to be done in the country on all kinds of things, the economy, the border, and even election integrity, believe it or not. That's why this has been such a fascinating presidential administration, because the key components of the Biden platform do not match with what most Democrats want for the country. And yet, again, looking at it today, Democrats have a 75% job approval rating for Joe Biden. They love him. Now, if you've been following us, you're pretty familiar with this chart, but this is us taking a victory lap about how accurate we were in the 2016 and 2020 presidential election cycles. I think, the narrative is that pollsters just had absolutely no idea what would happen in 2020. But look, we were pretty much at the margin of error when you look at our 5-period moving averages. That last hot potato poll that everybody says is their final poll, that's one of the tricks that they use in the industry to, slander people for being inaccurate. These numbers swing all over the place, but when you smooth them out with a moving average, it's very clear what happened in those races, and we were accurate. And here's what's going on in this cycle. Trump is doing quite a bit better than he was doing in 2020, and Biden is still doing 10 points worse than he was 4 years ago. And again, Biden will probably close that gap some, but people have changed their minds in a massive way in the last 4 years. And I'll tell you what, you could see that little hiccup right there in the Trump numbers. That's the guilty verdict impact. And I think you would agree with me that it is not what Democrats expected to happen. But I mentioned Gavin Newsom, and here's what we have. Gavin Newsom is the governor of California, and he's been suggested as a possible replacement for Joe Biden as the Democrat Party's presidential candidate this year. Would you approve or disapprove of Gavin Newsom replacing Joe Biden? And only 32% of the country approves, but 37% strongly disapprove, and another 53%, a majority, disapprove. Only 12% strongly approve, and only 15% of Democrats strongly approve. And they don't even get to a majority when including the somewhats. Now, if you look at the numbers, there's some not sures lumped in there. So Democrats are pretty much split on this. But Joe Biden is losing by a massive amount. I really thought we were going to get a higher number. I really thought this was the one where Democrats would say that we have a candidate, let's replace Joe Biden with him. Now, if you've been following us also, you know that for the first time, a majority of Democrats just recently did agree that they want Joe Biden replaced. It just happens to not be Gavin Newsom. And why is that? Because Gavin Newsom loses to Donald Trump by 12 points. Now, we just talked about the disconnect between, the platform and the person, and how Democrats basically just approve of the idea of being in office. And I think that's part of the knock-on effects of what happens when you have someone like Joe Biden, who most people think is just a puppet. In our polling of possible replacements for Biden, everybody kind of polls the same. They poll just like Joe Biden, and they lose by a lot to Donald Trump. The only one that does better than Joe Biden is Michelle Obama, and that's only by like 1 point. But then there's Gavin Newsom, and he does a few points worse than Joe Biden, and that's just because he's not very likable. People don't like him. So Democrats want a replacement. They can't agree on who, but they pretty clearly agree that it's not Gavin Newsom. So here's the problem for Democrats. The guilty verdict didn't take out Trump. Trump is still massively winning. Joe Biden is an unpopular president. His approval rating is structurally still a couple points lower than where Donald Trump's was 4 years ago. And that was, again, at the height of the COVID crisis 4 years ago. 57% of the country thinks that over time, Joe Biden is getting less and less mentally sharp. And less than 1 in 4 voters actually say no to that question. With the number of left-leaning independents and Democrats we have in the electorate, he can only get 24% of people saying that he isn't declining mentally. And again, he takes 40% of the vote. So there's still 16% of people who vote for Joe Biden, even though they admit he's getting less and less mentally sharp over time. And I think that's just rich. So again, if you've learned something today or you like our content, please follow us on YouTube or Rumble, like the video, and drop a comment if you have a question or if you have an idea for questions that we should poll the population on. And follow us on Twitter at Rasmussen_poll if you haven't already. And you can follow me at Mark_R_Mitchell. And that's so you don't miss our upcoming video, which is going to be about vaccine polling. And again, we're the only pollster that will touch that topic, and it has really hurt a lot of feelings. We actually just trolled a Pulitzer Prize winning LA Times journalist into saying the most stupid thing you can imagine on our own Twitter feed. So again, you're definitely not going to want to miss that. And thanks for watching.